Before we begin, if you love mysterious and spine-chilling stories, hit the like button and share your thoughts in the comments. It helps the channel grow and reach more thrill seekers like you. Tonight, we have two chilling and mysterious tales to share with you. So settle in, turn down the lights, and prepare for the unknown. Welcome to Echoes in the Dark. The secret beneath the skin. There are jobs that change your life, some for the better, and others in ways you could never imagine. What if you found yourself surrounded by people who weren't really people? What if their skin wasn't what it seemed, and their very presence sent chills down your spine? Tonight, I'll share the chilling experience of Sarah, a woman who thought she had landed the perfect job, until she saw what lay beneath the surface. Stay with me, because by the end of this story, you may start questioning the people around you. Sarah had always been good with kids, so working at a daycare in San Diego, California felt like the perfect job. That's where she met Melissa, a young mother who brought her 2-year-old son in every day. The little boy adored Sarah, clinging to her more than his own mother. One day, Melissa made her an offer to triple her salary in exchange for becoming her son's full-time nanny. Additionally, she wouldn't have to worry about transportation. Her driver would pick Sarah up every day. The money was too tempting to refuse, and before long she found herself swept into a world of luxury. Melissa and her husband had more money than she had ever seen, but something about them felt off. Melissa was young, barely in her mid-20s, but her husband was pushing 50. He was rarely home, always on business, and whenever Sarah saw him, he gave off a strange presence, like he was constantly watching her. Despite this, Sarah loved her job, until one day everything changed. Melissa suddenly announced they were leaving the country. No warning, no details, just gone. One day, Sarah had everything. The next, she was unemployed. Desperate to maintain the lifestyle she had grown used to, she searched for a new job. Nothing felt right, until she met Margaret at her upscale gym. Margaret was wealthy, well-connected, and impressed by Sarah's appearance. She introduced Sarah to her husband, a surgeon opening a new high-end cosmetic clinic in Los Angeles. The pay? Even better than before. The job seemed simple. Work as a receptionist, handle scheduling, and greet patients. But there was one rule: never ask questions. Sarah quickly noticed something odd about the patients. Every single one of them was tall, blonde, and had piercing green eyes, men and women alike. None of them spoke more than necessary. They never exchanged pleasantries. They simply walked in and said, "Tell the doctor I'm here." Their movements were too precise, their expressions too perfect. It was as if they were trying to blend in but hadn't quite mastered it. For months, Sarah ignored the growing unease in her stomach, until one day, everything changed. A woman entered the clinic, different from the others. She wasn't impossibly tall, her hair was brown, and she had brought a baby. She was accompanied by a nanny, a quiet woman who barely spoke. Sarah greeted them as usual, but something about the nanny's stare unsettled her. Then it happened. The woman stood up from the leather waiting chair, and her skin stuck to the material. Sarah froze, watching in horror as the skin on the woman's leg stretched and peeled away like latex. The woman didn't react, simply smoothing it back into place. At that same moment, the doctor stepped out, furious. "You shouldn't have brought her," he hissed, glaring at the nanny. The woman shot back, "The baby stays with me, and she helps me with the baby." The tension in the air was suffocating. Finally, the doctor let the woman in, leaving Sarah and the nanny alone. The nanny turned to Sarah, looking at her carefully, scanning her clothes, her shoes, and her purse. "You're not like them, are you?" she asked in a hushed tone. Sarah's blood ran cold. Before she could respond, the nanny pulled out a small bottle of pills and pressed them into Sarah's hand. "Take one. Stay calm. If they sense fear, they'll know you figured it out." Sarah hesitated but took a pill. It worked instantly. The panic subsided, but her mind was racing. Who were these people, and why was this woman helping her? The doctor finished with the woman and stormed back inside, leaving Sarah alone at the desk. Moments later, the front doors burst open. A man, one of them, but different, staggered inside. He was injured, gripping his arm, which was covered by his coat. Sarah stood to assist him, but when he moved, his sleeve shifted just enough to reveal something horrifying. Beneath the torn skin, there was another layer. Not human skin, not muscle, but something green, scaly, wet. Panic took over. Sarah had seen too much. She grabbed a piece of paper, scribbled the words, "I quit," and slapped it on her desk. Then she ran. She didn't stop to pack, didn't even go home, just called a friend and disappeared. Within days, she left California entirely, moving to another state, cutting all ties. To this day, she wonders, was she paranoid, or had she narrowly escaped something she was never meant to see? There have always been theories about beings that walk among us, hiding in plain sight. Some call them shapeshifters. Others believe they're part of an elite bloodline that has controlled the world for centuries. What if Sarah accidentally stumbled into something real? What do you think? Were they something unnatural? Or was it just an illusion, a trick of the mind? Let us know in the comments. Reptilians in the Shadows, the most chilling story my grandfather ever told. They say some stories are too strange to be fiction. That reality, no matter how solid it seems, hides things most people aren't meant to see. Tonight, I bring you a tale passed down through generations, a story of survival, horror, and something that shouldn't exist. If you enjoy unraveling the unknown, don't forget to like this video and share your own eerie experiences in the comments. Now let's dive in. Just remember, some truths are better left undiscovered. My grandfather Richard was a man of few words, but when he spoke, you listened. He lived to the age of 94, sharp-minded and self-reliant until the very end. He never exaggerated, never sought attention with his stories. And yet, there was one tale he only told once, one so chilling that even he hesitated to recall it. It happened when he was just 17. Times were hard, and he and his friends traveled from town to town, picking up whatever work they could find. One summer, they heard about a coffee plantation deep in the rural South that paid well for seasonal workers. The conditions were tough, but the money was good, so they took the job. From the moment they arrived, Richard felt uneasy. The plantation was vast, isolated, and eerily silent. The workers weren't from the area. Only outsiders were hired. The landowners, a wealthy European family, rarely showed themselves, leaving the management to an imposing foreman named Mr. Weller. The first month passed without incident, but then the heat became unbearable. One particular day, it felt unnatural, thick, suffocating air that made every breath heavy. That night, Weller came around, handing out bottles of whiskey, urging the workers to drink and relax. Most of them did, but Richard, never one for alcohol, only sipped at his drink. At midnight, as he stepped outside for air, he saw something he would never forget. From the main house, two towering figures emerged, dragging what looked like heavy sacks behind them. They weren't men, not entirely. They were enormous, easily over 8 feet tall, with broad shoulders and unnatural proportions. Their movements were slow, deliberate. Richard ducked behind a tool shed, barely daring to breathe as he watched them disappear into the forest toward the river. The next morning, 2 workers were missing. No one asked questions. No one even seemed surprised. When Richard brought it up, Weller simply said, People leave. It happens. But Richard knew better. That night, he snuck out with one of his friends to investigate. They followed the path those creatures had taken and arrived at the riverbank. The air smelled of iron. And then they saw it, a pile of shredded clothing, blood-stained, half buried in the mud. They ran back, hearts pounding. The next day, Weller announced a search party for the missing workers, but Richard knew it was for show. He decided he needed to leave, but escape wasn't easy. The plantation was deep in the wilderness, and there was only one road out, one Weller controlled. One night, Richard decided to play drunk and half asleep, hoping to see what truly happened in the darkness. He lay motionless, his breathing slow and steady, as he watched through barely open eyes. Then he saw them, up close. They weren't just large. Their skin was wrong, pale, almost translucent in the moonlight. Their eyes were set too wide apart, impossibly dark, unblinking. They moved with an eerie silence, dragging away the others, their limbs too long, their motions too precise. Then one of them stopped, turned. Its gaze locked onto him. Richard fought every instinct to run, to react. The creature cocked its head, studying him. Then it opened its mouth, not to speak but to release a guttural clicking sound that sent ice down his spine. For a moment he thought they had seen through his act. But then, as if satisfied, they turned away and disappeared into the night, taking someone else with them. Richard knew he had one chance. The next day, he faked illness, making himself as weak as possible. By the afternoon, Weller and one of the creatures came to check on him. The moment they stepped inside his shack, Richard acted. He grabbed a handful of dirt, throwing it in Weller's eyes, then lunged for the door. The creature moved faster than he expected, but Richard had one advantage. It didn't expect resistance. He slammed the door behind him and bolted for the fields. His friends saw him running and didn't hesitate. They grabbed their things and followed. Not everyone made it out. Some refused to believe, refused to run, but Richard and 3 others pushed through the night, avoiding the main road, cutting through the wilderness. Hours later they reached the next town, exhausted, starving but alive. The plantation was abandoned months later. The owners vanished, leaving no trace, but the stories remained. Decades later, locals would still talk about the disappearances, about the strange figures seen at night near the river. Richard never went back. He never sought answers, but he never doubted what he saw. Were those creatures an ancient race hidden in plain sight, something non-human controlling the land, preying on the forgotten? Or was it something worse, something that had been there long before people settled the land? Some mysteries are never meant to be solved, but if there's one thing Richard taught me, it's this: trust your instincts. If a place feels wrong, if your gut tells you to leave, don't wait, just go.